So, Pig, thanks so much for taking the time, man. I really appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for having me, mate.
Um, okay, so the customary question I've gotten to the rhythm of asking folks: how'd you get into StarCraft?
Okay. I grew up playing RTS games. I guess when I was like 8, my dad brought a computer home, and I think it was Command and Conquer was probably the first one. I feel bad for kids these days because they get shown some terrible console game as their first game or some mobile game instead. But back in the day, it was you just naturally would get introduced to RTS games because they were the best, biggest games, right? So I played on and off. I guess Warcraft 3 was when I first played a ladder competitively. We'd played like a little bit on dial up to our mates before that, but your parents would shout at you because you'd have to take the phone off the hook. Otherwise, you'd get disconnected in the middle of the match, and then they'd realize, yeah, we missed an important call and all this stuff. Warcraft 3 came out, discovered, BattleNet and matchmaking and ranked ladder. Found that really fun. You still couldn't get into esports unless you were pretty hardcore back then, though, because you had to download a replay, download an MP3 file, sync up the MP3 with the replay. That was how you would watch broadcast matches, right? That's how you couldn't, there was no streaming, right? So I remember like my older brother, who was a bit more hardcore into it than I was, like did that a few times. So I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting, but it didn't really fully grab my fancy. I liked playing 2v2 ladder. I liked playing a bit of 1v1s and like leveling up and getting my portraits, but nothing like that. Nothing too crazy. I guess in the early 2000s there was also a big PC bang internet cafe boom. And like everyone at my school would always go and play Counter-Strike, and then Dota got big over time and stuff like that. And it was always hard to find people to play RTS games with, but there was just a lot of kind of social competitive gaming experiences. And guess I had a lot of friends that were into gaming, and then StarCraft 2 came out, and yeah, just kind of like it had been years since I'd really played like Warcraft ladder or anything like that. Maybe a year or two earlier, I dabbled in some 2v2 tournaments with a buddy, just like for the shits and giggles, and then it was like a bloody drug the moment I remembered how good 1v1 competition and ladder felt. And then you'd get frustrated and lose, but you could actually open videos and streams and find all these people commentating awesome pro matches. There were these exciting tournaments. You could learn so much from guys like Artosis and Day 9, who were so insightful in their commentary. And it was basically something that took me from I guess what a casual person would call a hardcore gamer, but really not compared to, definitely not an esports gamer. And then I got really into it basically right from the moment StarCraft 2 came out. I guess Husky and HD StarCraft were like the gateway drugs, as they were for many people.
Yeah,
And it kind of went into finding out about GSL. And one of my buddies from high school was like, "Oh, hey man, check out this." It linked me an MLG stream, and I was like, "What the hell is this? This is crazy!" Like, it was a really cool experience.
very cool. So, one thing I've heard you say is that like the StarCraft One campaign was really good in your opinion. What made it so good to you?
StarCraft 1.
Campaign.
I think it's just the sounds are great, right? The visuals are great, the sound effects. It just has a very cool feeling to it, especially for the time, right? It's kind of like you remember like Final Fantasy VII having great graphics, and you go back and look at it and you're like laughing. But it's kind of the same with StarCraft 1, where it's just something about the first time at a friend's place, like playing the first few Terran versus Zerg kind of missions, the holdout mission, and just I remember like there being something about like having Marines versus Zerglings, and you're like, oh my god. And I don't think I'd even seen Alien at that point because I was too young. But so that was kind of like when I saw Alien, I was like, oh, this is StarCraft. This is so cool. But it's like basically the best sort of or Aliens, I guess, is the one with the lots of dumb Marines spamming their machine guns at them.
Yeah,
There was something just so satisfying about like loading those bunkers up and having Marines gunning down these waves of Zerglings running at you, and then finding out when you get into the Zerg campaign about like the way the Zerg mechanics work with like the lava and the eggs was so different after playing Warcraft 1, Warcraft 2, Command and Conquer. They all worked in the same way. You'd mine, you'd build your production buildings, you'd build stuff, and there was like this really fascinating way about the way Zerg, Protoss, and Terran all kind of had these very distinct feelings to them.
very insightful. I was wondering, you mentioned that you liked it, and that totally makes sense. Um, What do you think Blizzard did the best job with in the development and like community growth around StarCraft 2?
Hmm. Oh, that's kind of interesting because like I always think it's like a mixed bag where they did some things really terribly and some things really great.
That's the next
And
question.
sometimes
So, yeah.
yeah, okay, I'll stick to the good ones for now. It all kind of blends into one because like there's certain things that were missing on launch. It's not that StarCraft 2 is completely free of the plight of modern games not being finished when they come out. Um, but what did they do well? Well, I think supporting GSL and having that be big early was definitely good. And then having just a lot of tournaments was fantastic. I gotta say though, it's so hazy because I kind of got into it in the early days of StarCraft 2, so I'm not really an expert in terms of like what really was their outreach in the very first year or two of StarCraft 2. Like I remember for coming out with the balance and the design for Heart of the Swarm, I was a pro gamer at that point, not a very great one, but I remember getting to go to like a meeting with David Kim with like a bunch of other pros and then like taking feedback and stuff like that. But I think what I really remember as the best thing Blizzard did was probably 2015, maybe 2016 to 2018 was kind of like the golden age of Blizzard's handling of StarCraft 2, realizing that, hey, there's like, this is a modern games era. And if you can kind of run a game as a service and drop new content and make it really exciting and run all these community events and actually promote your streamers and your content creators and give them constant new content to talk about, to make content around, promote them through drops, which is basically the most explosive thing you can possibly do to promote an online Twitch and kind of viewing culture, because people just go crazy over in-game items. And if you kind of feed that back into the streaming kind of environment and stuff, that gets crazy. So that was the time there's like constant co-op commanders, new mutations. Co-op was really booming. Free to play came out late 2017. Brought in a lot of new people. It felt like there was a Twitch Rivals event they were sponsoring where all the different Twitch streamers were competing in these silly games and like Archon mode tournaments. There was just a vast amount of constantly things happening. Really good feedback as well, right? Like and community outreach. In the early years, they'd be like, this strategy's happening every game. Let's wait and see. Let's wait and see. And they'd just be like radio silence. And they're kind of like forward-facing PR, and I would always make fun of their posts because they were so PR speaking. They're like, we hear you as a community, and we understand your concerns, and we're doing this change. And rather than just bunker build time -5 seconds, that's what like the old patch notes would be. Instead, they're like, we noticed this is a problem, and we wanted to make this small adjustment, but we also realized this could have unintended consequences, perhaps affecting this and this, and we've got our eyes on it. We'll be ready to adjust that if that holds true. Basically, they just got good at reining in the naturally overly passionate hardcore gaming community that wants to rage at every change, and instead just like have this constant line of communication, constant content coming out. And I think the community felt very cared for during that time. So I think that was where Blizzard had kind of combined all the lessons from the early years and kind of brought StarCraft 2 into the modern age of like really top tier community management and content creation to keep your service going.
Yeah, it's funny because I agree to a certain extent. Like, one thing that was very surprising to me, going to Katowice and just talking to a bunch of fans and stuff, was that, like, I would say 30 to 40% of the people I met got into StarCraft, like, post 2016, post 2017, which I think is really goes against the grain of what most people think, right? Because the heyday was obviously much earlier, so I think a lot of people presume that all the current players and fans are from that era, and it seems like about half of them aren't, maybe more. I don't know.
Yeah, it's crazy because I think there was a big I guess from late 2012 Broodlord Infesta was when it started, but I guess really 2014, late 2015, probably especially kind of syncs up with like Broodlord Infesta being very stale, Swarmhost meta being very stale, Turtle Raven with Seeker Missiles being very stale. These big stale metas that hung around for a long time is where it really blossomed. But you'd have this like doom and gloom kind of talk in the community, and people are like, League of Legends is growing even though it's such a bad game, because obviously StarCraft players are elitist and they don't like that you're only controlling one unit. That's dumb. Oh my god, now people are playing Counter-Strike and it's exploding and our game's shrinking, and people were kind of like, jump ship, get out of here, it's dying, it's dead, right? This is where the dead game meme started. It was probably like late 2012 even, when it was very far from dead. And still is, I would argue. But I feel like it's this weird thing where people were just kind of like going getting kind of crazy about it, and there was like a big dip in these. I don't know if I want to call them esports hanger-ons, but there's like a lot of people I know who basically just jumped to the new like hot esport
Yeah.
instantly to Valorant, instantly to Overwatch when it came out before that, instantly to Hearthstone back when that was the first big start of the card game online boom in many ways, I would say. Um, so those people like shedded and they all just kind of left. And then maybe there was a bit of a lull. I don't know, but definitely I feel like there's just been a constant stream of new people coming in from them. And especially if you do educational content that caters to new players, there's like so many voices that you don't realize. If you're just doing like I'm hardcore high GM studying pro builds, you don't really hear from them as much. But the moment if you're in a community where you create, like when I do bronze to GM, I'm just like, oh my god, like how are there this many people every single day popping up my Twitch chat going, I just started playing, thanks so much. Like I was so lost. I watched your video and I managed to win my first game. And I'm like, it's surprising because it is such an old game, but I guess free to play really helped with that, and all of that content and co-op and everything coming through. So it is weird because like yeah, for a long time I remember as a content creator I could talk to people and everyone knew all the same old memes and all the same old stories.
Yeah.
And definitely in the last 4 or 5 years, it's been much more. I'll start like telling a story as if everyone knows, and I'll be like, oh, I need to actually explain the history. I need to explain the context of all this because at least half the audience will have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I felt like an old man at like a party when I was talking to a lot of Starcraft fans. Just like I mentioned MC, and there was people who were like, "I don't know who that is," and I was like, "You don't know who that is? What do you mean?"
top of the earnings for like 5 years.
Yeah, it's bananas. Okay, but moving back into the earlier topic, right? So we talked about what Blizzard did the best. What do you think they kind of handled the worst in StarCraft 2?
Yeah, I guess let's start with like release, which is like chat channels weren't in the game and a bunch of stuff like that. So this is every games company these days, right? Like there's like core features that are missing on release of full priced games. A lot of people like hate the early access model where like games like, oh, we're going to be like a $40 game or something, but we're going to kind of start selling it straight away and develop as we go. And sometimes the actual launch is like really a soft launch. It's more like, hey, and sometimes people even get critical and say like, hey, it's basically they're just going to stop deving it now. Launch is actually when it starts dying. But generally it's kind of nice because it's not like, oh, hey, this is a fully finished game. Here's it's $100 or $80, $70, I guess, if you're in US. And bam, it comes out and you can't like talk to your friends in the game and you're like, what? And you know, the Battle.net profiles like are terrible. There's no stats. Everything that was so well done in Warcraft 3, like Warcraft 3, you bloody go on the Battle.net website and it's like, you have a 33% win rate on Lost Temple with Blade Master opening. You're like, holy crap. StarCraft 2 didn't have any statistics. It didn't have anything like that. Your profiles were very, very basic. And yeah, it also didn't have like, I mean, I can't remember when they released the different leagues, but it was like steadily they released like Masters and then GM and stuff like that. Only well after release. The ladders were split into this really dumb division system, which they still have, but it no longer takes front and center.
Yeah, it's
where
not
your
relevant
MMR
anymore.
was invisible. Yeah, like you've still got like people are like, oh, I have 800 bonus pool pig. What does that
Yeah,
mean?
nothing.
It's like, oh my god, it helps you move up your meaningless division.
Yeah.
Your division does not matter. Like it's so, you know, it was this whole kind of like we can't show you what's happening in the game because it'll scare people off. So Blizzard basically had a very big approach in the early years of StarCraft is scary and it's hardcore and we need to make it more friendly by like hiding things and obscuring like what's really happening. But at the end of the day, there was still things like you log in and it's just like 1v1 rankers in front of you. Like they didn't actually have, it wasn't well designed as a gaming experience to funnel people towards team games, there was no co-op in the early days as well, right? So it was very much 1v1 focused. If you look at any modern game, I mean, like I am really hoping Stormgate when it comes out pushes 3v3 super hard because I just think team games are fun and social experiences are great and it can still be an awesome 1v1 experience. But for me, what I've always struggled with in StarCraft is people are like, oh, the game's dying. It's not as popular. RTS isn't as popular. No one wants to play RTS. I'm like, no one ever wanted to play 1v1 RTS. How many friends do you have that play football growing up? Everybody. Everyone played soccer or football or some teams. no one played tennis. No one played golf. No one played the 1v1s. There was one or two kids that you knew at most that would play the 1v1 sports.
Yeah.
And it's exactly the same with StarCraft. And I know this because I grew up going internet cafes and there'd be one dude playing Warcraft 3 or StarCraft out of 40 people playing computer games. And occasionally you'd spy another guy, and people would get excited if they saw me with like Warcraft or StarCraft open, and they'd be like, "Let's play!" They'd challenge me. Like, I'll mess you up, man. Let's fight, let's go. And I'd be like, "Hell's yeah!" Because it was so rare, and that's the golden age of like 2002. Everyone's like, "Oh, RTS is so big at this time." 1v1 competitive RTS was never that big. Campaigns were bigger. Use map settings, fun social modes, silly team games, tower defenses. I don't know. Arcade games, like this crazy one called Defense of the Ancients that came out and apparently is, born its own bloody, offshoot of
Some
RTS,
little scene.
which is what MOBAs are. So yeah, like it's kind of crazy because like it was just it wasn't really designed around that, and I guess that reminds me of, well, their arcade sucked, right? Because they were like, oh, we own everything, right?
Yeah.
You cannot if you make anything in our engine, we've still got a great editor. If you make anything here, we own it because Dota ran away and took our money and we're upset about it. Oh, also, we're going to start trying to shut down StarCraft 1 because they're not paying us any money in Korea as well. So we're going to try and shut down their StarCraft 1 leagues until they agree to pay us royalties or whatever. So StarCraft was embroiled in a lot of legal action over their former mistakes, kind of going, hey, we've got this game mode in Warcraft that millions, tens of millions of people are playing every day. We're just going to kind of look at it and go, hey, we're busy with World of Warcraft. Let's just keep doing that. And then, 5 years later, when another company comes along, Valve, and makes an amazing Dota 2 game and gets all of those community in to do it, Blizzard's like, oh, we want the money now. We want the money. So Blizzard basically made some short-sighted decisions in that regard. And as a result, they ended up saying, well, we want to protect our IP. Understandable. You're a corporation. You want to make money. But they also, at the same time, had a really crappy arcade system. I don't even think it was called arcade. I think it was just a bad custom games menu at that point. And they basically alienated the entire map-making, use map setting community that made all their previous RTSs as great as they were.
Yeah, that's funny because I feel like with most of the StarCraft 1 people, they started with almost exclusively those custom maps. And then, maybe got into 1v1, but like how many people ended up doing that? Few.
Exactly.
So
it's like a 10% at most.
yeah, that might even be generous. Who knows? So one thing you just mentioned that I think is a very interesting question is Blizzard's sort of interaction with the Korean community and more specifically KESPA in the early days. Do you think that controversy is part of why StarCraft 2 did not have the huge public adoption that some people thought it would in Korea?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, you got obviously StarCraft 2 is a different game, and it doesn't. I would say StarCraft 1 actually is like definitely easier to watch in terms of like movement on the minimap if you like military history and battles and like positioning. Whereas StarCraft 2 is a little bit more sudden and brutal because of the way the pathing works. So there is that, but there's also just the fact that like, you've got this like hugely ingrained organization in KESPA, the Korean Esports Association, whatever they're called.
Yeah.
And they've got all the top pro gamers. They've got this scene. It's been on TV for years. It's massive. And then basically all the news in Korea, and this is from what I've heard from people, of course, second and third hand, you need to speak to Koreans, was Blizzard's trying to shut down, Brood War. Blizzard are the bad guys, right? I think KESPA did a very good, probably kind of PR and campaign of being like, hey, we're the good guys here. We just want to run this great game. We're not making that much money, but they want to come in and shut us down. I'm sure there's a greed element and self-interest for KESPA as well, but definitely wasn't good optics for Blizzard. So I think that was pretty huge. And I guess that's why there was also such a big effort to get people over. But you can kind of see the way it's bounced back, where they got a lot of the B teamers over. Then they got Pro League to swap over in like 2013, I think is when that started. Maybe late 2012. Yeah, sometime around then. And you got like, we got J-Dog and Boxer and all these guys and stuff. But it's kind of interesting. The moment that wasn't like kind of forced and stuff and things started to fall apart organizationally in Korea, a lot of those players went back to Brood War because that was just the game they fell in love with. And for them, it was a sport that had not changed in a long time. And StarCraft 2, as much as it's kind of a weird halfway game where it's kind of halfway trying to be that like, this is just the same sport that you're playing the same game from 20 years ago. But then they steadily like patched more and more as StarCraft 2 went along, to the point where it's more like modern games. Where it's like, hey, there's a new patch and it changed a bunch of things, and it kind of gives you a reason to come back and play because things are fresh and interesting. Whereas Brood War, it's like, yeah, it's the same kicking the ball into the goal that you were doing when you were a kid. So you can come back to it anytime, and it's the same. And that's really great because it removes a barrier to entry, right? Because or re-entry, I guess I should say. You can teach it to your kid, you can play it at an older gamer, you can come back and it's all the same, and it's like that comfortable feeling of playing, a game. It's kind of funny because I'm always torn with like that is very nice. On the other hand, learning new things, it feels like you'd think it would turn people off, the balance changing and people being like thrown off. But I think it only turns off very hardcore gamers that are a bit more inactive, because then they kind of like they come back and they're like, my old builds don't work. But I think the casual players just enjoy changes just for the fun of it, because they're just not as serious, they're not as try hard essentially.
No, that totally makes sense. So also, kind of staying on the Korea topic, the crowdfunding for GSL has really taken off. Is that something you've followed much?
Yeah, I supported the Wardi Cup, as well as, of course, getting the replays for GSL.
Yeah.
It's kind of a shame. GSL has done this really poorly. I guess obviously they they took a few months. I mean, this is the problem when a company tries to organize things in a space like this. Is like myself running PigFest and getting funding for that, and the second PigFest already being mostly funded that we're hosting in a few months. Wardi running the Korean Royale, Dave
KSL,
and Chicken Man doing KSL.
Yeah.
We are like kind of stole the thunder there. As if it was all, if they immediately like, hey, we're bringing out this great thing. This is like, we're gonna do this. This is, and we're gonna make sure our Toastless is casting with Tasteless, even if it's like remote or whatever. Like, there's a lot of things they could do optically. But instead it was like, hey guys, we're doing a Patreon. Like for GSL, you can give us money. Also, you can't watch full screen on YouTube live anymore. And it was like, oh my, this is not how crowdfunding works. Like, I know you guys are a company, you're a corporation, you're not used to doing crowdfunding, but like crowdfunding is something that's like, it's very sensitive. You want to make sure people feel like you are giving them something in return. You want to be very like open and transparent and honest. It's crazy, right? Because for me, I was like, whatever, I'm giving money for the replays. It's kind of crappy that it's not going to the prize pool and the players, is literally what I thought when I signed up. And then I see people posting like, oh, no, it's all going to the prize pool, all of it. And I'm like, go back to the Patreon page, doesn't say it anywhere. And I'm like, oh my God.
Oh, but
like,
they said it on the cast.
But they said it on the cast, which I didn't catch. So I'm just like, well, is that even real? Why would it not be said on the Patreon page?
Pretty silly.
Like, this already, it's lowering trust in the organization. So Africa needs to do a better job about just making sure they're upfront with that. And pushing people to Africa is a perfectly logical decision. But why would you coincide it with launching a crowdfunding thing at the same time? Like, to me, it's just a lack of experience in the crowdfunding space. So I hope they learn. I hope they do evolve and kind of give some better rewards and just communicate a little bit clearer. But at the moment, it is kind of weird because I'm like, oh, it's GSL and there's tasteless casting and that's cool and State's doing a great job. On the other hand, I kind of feel like the Korean Royale's an almost more important tournament right now, in terms of like prize pool and all this sort of like there's just something about it that like the fact that the funding got cut to like 10% and then they only announced this crowdfunding much later, and I haven't really seen, is that actually making the prize pool sizable? It does feel like GSL's taken a large hit to how prestigious it is and how important it is. And I think it's kind of almost like just another online tournament at
basically
this point is what it feels like.
So the prize pool was cut to like about 25K per season, but the Patreon is at like I think 13K or something like that a month.
13K a month, which is only 2 seasons a year, right?
3. And then the only thing that's strange is how much is the Patreon going to dip between seasons? B, the big question is like, how is this money going to get distributed? Like, is one season of GSL going to pay out more than the others because the crowdfunding was running for more months, like running up to it? Like, is there going to be excess money that's gathered? I don't know. It's a weird.
There needs to
format.
be clear communication around that system, right? Because like all those question marks, you're like, yeah, exactly. Those are such good questions. I hadn't even thought about those, but it's like, are you? Because I mean, doing it per month, not per season, also seems a little weird. Because like it is like this thing where people, I know a lot of people are going to be confused. There was already a lot of people who were confused because there was a $5 tier and then a $30 tier.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, why isn't there one between? People like, oh, no, you sign up for one of those tiers, then you go to edit your amount and you can change it to any amount. But people are new to Patreon. They don't know how to do that. So yeah, it's definitely, I mean, they gotta clear that up because like even for me, I'm like, yeah, which pro players are getting what? Is it just keeping the same percentage prize split? I imagine they split it evenly across all seasons. Is there an arbitrary cutoff point? They've got to be more clear with that. I mean, Africa does great work for StarCraft, so like
Yeah.
I can't hate on them too much. I'm sure people will want to be bandwagoning and stuff, but I just feel like they can do a much better job, and I want to see them do that because they've done so many events for StarCraft, especially all the stuff they've done with Alpha X on the Africa platform that unfortunately a lot of people, aren't as aware of. I always try to promote whenever I cast a series from that because I'm like, there's really good show matches going on like every other day on Africa that they're sponsoring. So Africa is a cool company with their support for StarCraft, but yeah, this is something new they're venturing into, and they've got a lot of work to do.
Totally. Yeah. No. I'm happy to see it. It's like 10 years too late, unfortunately. But so that's another question, right? This is one thing I've written a little bit about, and just like some little articles and stuff. Why do you think GSL was so poorly monetized for basically its whole duration, both under GOM ownership and under Africa? Like there seemed to never be
Yeah.
a way to generate money from their viewer base, which was obviously primarily the foreign audience. That was something I pondered a lot about, right? Like even when they had they've had this LG sponsorship forever, right? But it's
Yeah.
only the Korean arm of LG. It's not LG Global.
Yeah.
Um, but the audience is global, right? So like they they
Yeah, it's such a missed opportunity, isn't it? It's like it's kind of I think I put it down to corporate laziness. In terms of like if you think of it, we have a business model, and I'm sure StarCraft GSL was never more than a certain percentage, right? In the early years, they were well monetized. The very first year or two, whatever, before it joined with Africa, I don't know when they joined Africa, 2015, but like in the very start, you paid a crazy amount of money to watch GSL. The free to view was like 240p.
yeah
So you'd be like staring at the pixels, like deciphering. You're like, I think that's an infester. Is it? No? Is it Broodlord? Like you have no idea what you were watching. And you'd have to pay like $100 a year or something because you pay for like each season. It was like all kind of pay-per-view stuff. MLG tried to do that as well. And because that's all GOM was doing, as far as I know, it was their main focus was like, hey, this new game's kicking off. Let's like focus on it. But I feel like, yeah, in recent years and stuff, it was like, okay, they were like, all right, well, we're gonna support it because Africa, we're gonna support this game. But then it's like it's not that popular in Korea, and Blizzard was propping up the prize pool and like paying for stuff, and they're like, oh, that's cool, we'll just keep doing this because Blizzard pays us enough money and our sponsors cover the rest, and our whole business model is working with a Korean audience and Korean sponsors. And generally, I mean, that's Korean companies are very focused on the Korean market, right? There's a huge cultural boundary, there's a huge language barrier. But it is kind of crazy when you think about it. It's like when you run a show for that many years, the audience is primarily Western. You've got all these foreigners coming to your studio in Korea every day to watch it. It's like it's definitely a huge missed opportunity, and especially with like all the warning signs of this coming in the last few years. The fact that it's like I can forgive it in 2017. I'm not crowdfunding or like branching out a little bit, but in the last few years, you're like, seriously, still not doing that. And I guess it's much harder for them to find sponsors, like foreign sponsors these days, but whereas it's more of a crowdfunding thing. And maybe that's all they would have been comfortable with. So maybe they hit the point where they're like, okay, like we should probably try to make some more money off this. Let's look for international sponsors. And at that point, the international sponsors like, is it Fortnite? Is this the Fortnite that we're sponsoring? And they're like, no, it's called Starcraft. They're like, Craft Star? I don't know what that is. I only want to Roblox or Fortnite is what I've got in my marketing documentation. They're the only things we're allowed to sponsor because apparently those are big. Speaking to marketing people over the years about gaming has always been fun, by the way. So I can't imagine they'd really be able to find sponsors easily for a StarCraft tournament internationally, especially as a Korean org with no contacts. But yeah, they definitely should have got into that earlier. And man, I remember the Reddit posts over the years. I just bought an LG TV. Thanks, GOM. People like, yeah, they don't care. Like that will not help them in any way. Like, what? I thought this would. I would just wanted to show the sponsorship work. They're like, they don't care. You bought it overseas. Like the way their marketing reporting is working, there's no way that's like what LG is paying for. They're paying for Korean sales. So it's kind of like it was definitely a big disconnect between the audience, man.
Yeah, it's like if you have a television show that's like 100% of your viewers are in America, so you reach out to like a Swedish company that only serves the Swedish domestic market for a sponsorship. Like that's essentially right, like
Yeah,
what
that's
happened.
exactly what it is.
Um, anyhow, moving on. So, one thing I was kind of wondering about, you've had a pretty illustrious, esports, but, primarily Starcraft career, both as a, pro gamer as well as a, personality. Is there anything in particular that stand out to you the most, like your biggest achievement or you're most proud of in your career?
Oh, that's a tough one because like I've gone through many stages. So I guess early years, winning WCS Australia was my big kind of happy moment as a pro gamer. I was like, oh my god, I won, a thing, and obviously there was like every level leading up to that was also like every time you hit your first, like the first time I won $5 in a weekly cup, I was like, yeah, best moment of my life. It's kind of like that when you're getting good as a gamer. And then you win $100, and then you win a few $100s and stuff like that. But getting to be up in a venue in front of like my family and a whole bunch of 500 Australians and drunk people and people being excited and beating a guy who I really looked up to and Moonglade and stuff. It was like, yeah, it's really exciting. So as a player, it was that. I would say beyond that, there's been a few different stages. I think I'm really proud of what I did in late 2017 and early 2018 when I'd been kind of doing content for a few years and I'd kind of never officially straight up retired, but I'd clearly moved my focus for a few years into content. But I hadn't really like I was grinding like a crazy person, and it was basically late 2017, and yeah, my wife, she was like, okay, let's do some like analysis, and it's like, okay, Twitch is actually like the highest earner in terms of money and time, and you've got a community there, and it's all like that's the one thing that is always so consistent. But I would only stream like a few hours a day, 4 or 5 days a week, and that was when I started focusing a lot harder on streaming Twitch. And I was also very lucky. I feel like sometimes I'm always very lucky in life because a lot of things just kind of like roll into place for me where I'm like, oh, I didn't even plan that, but free to play happened to come out like right after I went full time with Twitch there. I was like, oh, Twitch should be my focus. Like YouTube is secondary, everything else is secondary. I was always doing like 20 other gigs because I was casting, coaching people on the side, doing YouTube videos every day, Twitch streaming, traveling around the world to cast. I was doing all sorts of sponsorships and local events. I literally was like the random gigs I would take where I'd just be like, I'm hosting a Razer sponsored event. I don't even know what the hell I'm doing because I don't know how to host an event. But I'm just, hey guys, we got new Razer gear, computer getting, it's a new laptop getting launched. Like it's just I do anything because as someone who had zero cash, had made very little money per gaming, it was like, oh my god, like I'm so poor. I was just trying to make it. But what I did is I basically just took my focus from doing 20 different things at the same time and then just focused really hard on streaming and being the best streamer I could. And it was kind of that moment where I went from half-assing 20 different things to whole-assing one thing, is what I always say. And it hit a good time because free to play came out. I streamed a lot of months where it was like 250 hours live a month, 12-hour days, 24-hour streams, constantly setting new goals, hitting them, and just doing lots of community events, a lot of new shows that I still do, even some of them today, like Florencio Files, kind of got spawned during that time because I was just so engaged in the community that people would kind of send me lots of funny stuff, and then that would kind of spawn off into its own show on Twitch and YouTube. And so that was kind of a point where I after many years of kind of grinding many different areas, I kind of grinded in one area, and I finally got to the point where I was like, oh my god, I have more than $300 in my bank account. Like I'm not gonna fucking not be able to pay rent this month. This is amazing. I'm gonna be able to eat and survive, and the stream's growing well beyond what I thought it would. So I think that's probably a big proud moment where I kind of actually managed to put a few things together. And since then, I've focused on all sorts of different things, but Twitch has maintained like a very big role that is like just like the core community. And I feel like I've built a very good relationship with my Twitch community, and that's kind of like evolved into the thing where you couldn't do this back in the old days, but you hear a lot of like artists and musicians talk about it now, where it's like can't remember who it is. Maybe it's there's a person who says you don't need to like appeal to everybody. You just need like 1,000 serious fans or whatever it is. You just need like 1,000 like dedicated people that will actually watch and support your stuff.
That sounds familiar. I don't know who.
Someone in the comments will get it for us afterwards once it goes live. But yeah, it's kind of like that where I realized like, hey, you know, I don't need to please everybody, but yeah, listen to the community and try to, you know, create the stuff that I want to watch and all that sort of stuff. So that was like a big transformative experience where I was like, okay, watching a lot of content and trying to create stuff that I thought was worthy of watching and really respecting my audience. Whereas when you're first figuring it out, you're just like, I'm streaming. It's just me playing games. Here's a YouTube video. I don't know. I'll tell you how to improve. But because I am a pro gamer, I'm going to explain it as if you're already like a high GM player in like the most ultra detail that is not important for 99.9% of the audience. You know, like it was a lot of work just changing my mindset to try and make things a lot more accessible for everybody.
That's an awesome answer. I'm really happy to hear, like, I don't know, the positivity of how everything worked out. So another interesting idea I think is, you know, when at the beginning of the StarCraft 2 scene, you know, you were just like a fan of a lot of the big personalities, and obviously through, you know, working in the industry, I'm sure now you're obviously friends with a lot of those people. What did it feel like to move from a fan of some of the personalities to being friends with them?
Really cool, you know, kind of crazy. I got to yeah, like I remember kind of going to China for the first time in 2011 for IEM Guangzhou and like just being like, oh my God, this is so crazy. And like, you know, I've like got paid for that event like 2 years later, I think.
Oh,
This is
man.
back when ESL wasn't paying prize money until much later. They were in crazy debt. But it was such a crazy experience because like me and I guys went and we just got the cheapest flights we could. I call it the cattle bus. I think it's China Southern Airlines. You know, it's like the worst. Like just so crowded. I was like, I didn't know the seats could be this small. There's like an old man who'd stand up to stretch and fart like in my face every 5 minutes. It was great. So and then we stayed in like the shittiest hotel ever that I found, and yeah, and like kind of like just we're eating like $2 noodles or 50-cent noodles or whatever from the corner, and then you get there and you get to the venue. It's in this crowded anime convention, and you're like, oh my God, that's Idra. Oh my God, there's like Strelok and all these kind of guys, and just getting to like follow them around and just be like, oh, I'm just gonna like, you know, tag along and come and eat with you guys and stuff. And you know, I remember I think it was like I didn't even bring a mouse pad because I didn't play with a mouse pad at home. Like it was just that I was that noob, and like Damaga's just like, fuck are you doing and stuff like this. So it was definitely an odd experience. And then over the years, getting to commentate with people and like hopping on to guest commentate with like Day 9 at IEM 2012, and then over the years actually becoming a commentator and getting to know everybody and all the players and seeing how the players have changed over the years. It's been a really cool experience. I mean, yeah, like it's been very interesting to see how smart everybody is in StarCraft and how capable as well. Like I think it's not that I grew up around dumb people at all, probably the opposite, but you just kind of like, oh, you're like, oh my God, these are like such experts in their field, all the pro players and commentators and everybody, and you realize you're kind of like, oh, this is a good set of people to hang around. Like this definitely is not the wrong crowd to hang around. This is probably going to do well for my general kind of being switched on mentally. Like you ask pro gamers questions and you realize that with systematic thinking you can understand StarCraft on a much deeper level much quicker, even though you'll never be as quick as a guy like Neeb or someone who's just like, he's just like, well, obviously this thing, and you're like, huh? And you have to kind of like tease out the details, and you're like, oh, it does make sense now. It is obvious. Well, once I like get you to explain the details that seem obvious to you, but
Have you seen
so
Good Will
yeah, it's
Hunting?
cool. Oh yeah,
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 it's
like
such a
that
good movie,
scene
man.
where he's like, I wish you could do this shit, so I wouldn't have to explain it to you. uh,
Dude, it's actually crazy. Yeah, like some of the players and the commentators, like you know, Roddy's ability, we call him Elephant Brain for a reason. To like, he's like, oh yeah, 2013 Aces Frog. I think it was Group B. It was the third match between you know. And you're like, how do you remember this match, man? And he like remembers the strategies and stuff. You're like, what the hell, Roddy? It's crazy.
that is insane for sure. After casting, you know, infinity games. Um, But another little interesting piece of history I kind of wanted to touch upon was so there was a time period where you were playing on or sponsored by TTesports, and it was at the same time that White-Ra was with them. Did you have any interaction with him? Did you guys like practice together as a result of that?
No, it's not really. I mean, I saw him, like at an event. I'm like, I'm wearing the same jacket as you, and he's like, hey, buddy, kind of thing. But I think like maybe like an IEM or two. Like I've definitely hung out with White-Ra a couple of times. Unfortunately, I can't drink too heavily. I'm a pretty big lightweight, and that man is Ukrainian, and he can drink more vodka than anyone I've ever seen before. But every time I see him, I can. I've shared a shot with him once or twice. We've had a good time, but back in the old days, that was more of like a sponsorship more than anything, right? It's like a peripheral company who are like, hey, we're gonna rather than going and paying EG or someone, we're just gonna have an employee do it and basically run our own little esports division and just get some really cool branding and stuff like that. Get some cool jackets. Get a really big like just loved name like White-Ra. And yeah, I was very lucky that they were nice enough. They actually had a guy in Australia who I'm still mates with today, doing esports consulting work these days. And he kind of was like, hey, we're gonna make you like the Ozzie White-Ra, and I'm like, okay. I mean, you're not, but yeah, like it'll. I guess Australia is like not as small as I am compared to White-Ra, but it was nice because they did. It was the best sponsorship I'd gotten up to that point. Couple $1,000 over a year. It was like, wow, I could use this to fly to an event overseas. Yay. Which was like everything was always instantly reinvested in trying to travel to events. There were times where I'd like qualify to an event and I think it was only once, but one time I just was like, well, I have like no money, but like I really want to go. And I just like, yeah, I hate to ask, but like, the community, I crowdfunded a couple $100 for like a plane ticket one time to help like close the gap because I only had like 800 and I needed $1,000 or something like that. So it was definitely, you'd get these sponsorships and then I'd go to multiple conventions and events and local land things and do all this like so much like marketing type stuff for like a couple $1,000s a year where it's absolute insanity to think about these days. But you're scratching for peanuts, so you do what you have to do. And even as a pro player, like I was pretty much always like coaching on the side and stuff like that as well, just trying to be able to pay rent. Yeah, I think there's the one advice I give to people trying to be pro gamers is like, yeah, stay at mom and dad's place makes it a bit easier. Like if you don't have to pay rent and stuff, it's going to be a little bit easier. If you get a lot of practice in and get good while you're still in high school, just like any other sport, it's going to be nice, And don't underestimate how long it takes to get good at an esport. Like if it's a brand new game, you might think, well, everyone's bad, but there's always someone who's already been a pro at that genre for many years, and those skills will carry over. You might be a little successful as a newcomer in the very early days, but very quickly your lack of experience will show. So when you realize esports isn't like, a lot of people still have that view where they're like, oh, if I just like get in there, I can like, get lucky and like win a tournament or something. And it's like, you don't just get lucky and win an Olympic gold medal either. Yeah. Like, come on, like there's thousands of people working really hard to get this. And it's not like there's that much money in Starcraft to the point where it's as big as, the number of millions of people trying to be pro footballers, but there's still a ton of people and there's a lot of experience. And that's something that took me a while to learn with Starcraft too, was like, oh, these guys from Brood War and Warcraft just know so much and they have so much tournament experience. They've all traveled the world already for years and they just know how to learn much better than I do. Like I was an absolute nincompoop mentally compared to them. They were just so quick to like learn strategies and methodically figure things out. So like I remember even just guys like Grubby, where I'd just be like complaining about balance and he'd be like, okay, cool, but like actually tell me some numbers. Like I was like Nexus Overcharge is BS, and he was like, how much damage does it do? I'm like, too much. He's like, what's the number? It just kills my whole roach army. He's like, how many roaches does it kill over the entire duration? I'm like, I don't fucking know. And he's like, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I better go do my homework.
Good point.
I better stop complaining about this. You win this argument. And and it's like, it's that mindset of like, I picked up very quickly from other pros is like, anything that makes you angry, you don't understand on a deep enough level, basically. Like, you need to just go study it, basically. If you feel angry, good. Now, like, funnel it into self-improvement. You can't just sit there being angry. That's like, it's pointless, right? That's just your ego having a bit of a whine. But if it's a very motivating feeling, rage and anger. It's really good. So if you can just grab it and then use it for improving at something on the other hand and be like, oh, I'm never going to let this thing happen again. Let's figure this out. Let's understand this. That's actually really useful. So I'm like a very angry learner when it comes to competitive gaming. Like it's all about like a cycle of getting annoyed at stuff and using that as motivation to figure out how it works. And then once I know how it works, usually I can hit these kind of zen moments where I'm like super relaxed and calm, and then new things that I don't understand I encounter and I get really angry at them. And if I'm switched on, I'm very quick to use that to learn. And if I'm not very switched on and mentally, then it takes a bit longer. And kind of slowly dawns on me that I'm wasting time being angry when I could just be getting better.
Being bad at StarCraft has made me not mad at like any other game ever. And I feel like I got into Magic a lot recently over the last
Oh, cool.
6 months or so. And like my friends, get like pretty mad when something kind of busted happens on the board, and I'm just always pretty cool about it, and like they're all like, "Oh man, I'm so envious of that." I'm like, "Yeah, just play StarCraft, just like for 6 months. You'll never be mad at any other game again."
It's
Um,
like, yeah, there's a bit less chance in StarCraft, and there's a bit more chance in like Magic and other card games. But at the same time, the amount of variance in StarCraft, the things that can come out of the fog of war, it's like, yeah,
yeah,
you build those calluses real quick.
especially because it's all just mechanical in the beginning. Um, But when it comes to sponsorships, you've been partnered with AMD for like a long time now. How did that partnership come about?
Thankfully at this point, the Australian scene, it's kind of funny because like when my stream did, I guess, kind of explode in 2018, there weren't many Aussie streamers, so it's kind of funny because it's grown so much in the last 5 years. But I have a lot of relationships, I guess, with just a lot of the different companies that run sponsorships, different people in the industry who a lot of them are StarCraft fans. A lot of them have been in the industry for 10 plus years, and a lot of them were playing a lot of StarCraft and watching a lot of StarCraft in the early days. So it's kind of nice to have those connections. And whenever there's, so I've worked with so many different people that often things just kind of come my way where people say, hey, these guys are looking to work with someone. And if it matches up, obviously alignment wise, then it's usually pretty good. And AMD is kind of the dream sponsor because it's like obviously computer hardware. Like, it's like over the years of like being a pro player, you're like, do you want a free keyboard? Do you want a free mouse? Here's a free headset. Just like don't use any of our competitors' gear on anything. You're like, oh my gosh. And like that's especially dicey for a lot of streamers and content creators because like you'll have companies like they'll have exclusivity. And obviously, like if you're not a small creator, you will be getting money and all sorts of other stuff as well, potentially. But there'll be companies that make everything in a computer now, essentially, other than CPU and graphics card. So, they'll be like, okay, cool. Like, we're sponsoring you. Like, okay, cool. This is like my keyboard mouse sponsor. But then you're like, wait. They also make headsets now. Oh, and RAM. And they also make motherboards. And you're like, oh, okay. So, like, a big percentage of your endemic sponsor exclusivity is just being taken up by one sponsor. So you kind of like, oh, actually, I should probably be raising the rates for that. Whereas AMD is really nice because it's just specifically your GPUs, your processors. They make really good stuff, and it's fantastic. Like I just got a brand new computer very recently, so it's kind of crazy going from many years of building the most not the most budget, but definitely one in the old days pretty budget computers, never buying new stuff to now I've got computers that I'm like I could run this for the next 10 years, and it's like, well, time to update to the new hardware to show it off, and I'm like, what do I do? Like so I'm like. I'm kind of like, sometimes selling parts, sometimes I'm gifting them to my brother. My wife has a beautiful editing PC now as well, which is AMD powered. I've got a AMD powered streaming setup, and I'm like, this is crazy. Because in the old days, I was like, oh God, my computer's like barely running. I need to upgrade because it's just like dying and I have no cash at all. So AMD's been a pleasure to work with. They're also just very relaxed. The agency I work with that helps run that are just like the best. I do a bunch of stuff with them. And they're just they really get the gaming space. And that's what's been nice. 2023, go back 10, 12 years, 2011, 2012, 2013, working with sponsors. Oh God, so much working directly with marketing people at tech companies who just don't understand gaming. They don't know what's going on. I mean, the number of times I've showed up to PAX Australia and they're like, cool, you're doing the booth, yeah. And I'm like, no worries. Like, I just assume they have something set up. And they're like, so, the day before, they're like, what game do you want to do? I'm like, what do you mean? You guys don't have like a plan? They're like, oh yeah, like we want you to like host a World of Tanks tournament at our booth and commentate it or something. I'm like, what are you even talking about? I've never played this game. They're like, you can help us set it up, right? We don't know how the game runs. Maybe you can help. I'm like, what? What's going on? Like, you want me to install and set up a game and then teach randoms coming in to play? I'm like, oh god. I'm like, this is just like you just have these half-baked ideas thrown at you constantly, and the number of like different shows I've done and things where it's like it's fun because on the casting and hosting side, I just kind of like I just roll with the chaos at this point. I've commentated events with 3 different languages in my ear at the whole time, basically, and being like, okay, we're just gonna learn how to deal with this. So I kind of just I don't take it too seriously. That's something I picked up from Tasteosis many years ago. Is you're not working on a professional sports broadcast. There will be a few more hiccups, and you just kind of have to laugh at it. And the gaming audience loves that. The silly jokes and production errors and weird, bizarre things that happen are all right. But definitely sponsorship wise, it's like almost all agency run these days. The agencies are really organized, whether they're an online international one or a local one. They give you very clear things you want to do. They try to actually give value to the sponsors. It used to often feel like a cash grab, because you're like, oh, I like can't actually deliver what you guys need, but like it's because you didn't give me enough info, and now I've already agreed to do it. And now I feel bad because I'm not giving a sponsor value. They're not going to want to work with me in the future as well because they're not getting the value out of it. I'm like, this is not what you want in a sponsor relationship. You want to be like, oh, I show off your stuff. I like your stuff. You guys like the stuff. You get the community likes it because they're supporting you, and they also like the hardware and trust it because you trust it. And it's like this nice little that's the circle of what a sponsorship should be.
Yeah.
But in the old days, it was very rarely like that.
That was good to hear that that's changed. So one thing I've I think that you've done that has seen a lot of positive reception in the community is your development of the core. And it seems like it's been adopted by a decent number of foreign pros, and even like a lot of casuals I know has helped them a lot. But it doesn't seem to have seen a lot of adoption in the Korean scene. Is that true? Has it not?
I don't know any Korean that uses it. I think it's just like a community language barrier, It's just kind of like, it's also Koreans are the most set in their ways because most of them come from Brood War. Like the Korean experience is insane. Like you see like Fantasy or someone come back and start playing and you're like, this guy's been playing for 15 like plus years. Like it's some of them 18, 20 years. Like it's crazy how long they've been playing. So it's, I love the Koreans. This is like my favorite talking point is Korean mechanics because it's so ridiculous. Solar still uses P for patrol. So whenever you see him, there's a tactic to make your overlords dodge corrosive bile in ZVZ, right? You put them all in patrol paths. So whenever you see him setting that up in the mid game, and I noticed that at Home Story Cup, you see him use his pinky on the left shift and his thumb on the P, and he's doing this. Shift P, shift P. So he's doing these. I'm like, what is Solar doing on his keyboard right now? It's the most awkward movement I've ever seen. And he just has to do it like 5 or 6, 7 times to like patrol these 7 overlords on the map. And I'm like, that is so silly. Because there's plenty of keys on the left side of the keyboard. But it's just like, I only have to do this once in a game. You very rarely use patrol, whatever. I'll just use the right side. That's a light example. Then you've got 4GG, who's like, oh, A for Marine, that's too easy to reach. I've been pressing M for Marine for 20 years playing Brood War, not instantly rebound Marine to M. A lot of the Korean Protoss players as well, like they would be like, okay, Nexus on 098, because P was next to 098, so that's how you'd build probes in Brood War, right? You'd put your Nexi on those kids. So some of them would still do that, and you'd be like, whoa, why? That's crazy.
Yeah.
Don't rebind probe to P, that's insane. So it's just kind of like people being set in their ways. I always think of when Federer, maybe 5 years ago, my memory's pretty bad, was getting too old, which is kind of funny when you look at obviously how much longer Federer's career went for, and everyone was like, his career's going to be over. Maybe it was 3 or 4 years ago, and he changed his like racket and grip style completely. And it was a big talking point because he was like way worse for like 6 months or more. Like he just was not as good because he wasn't as used to it. He just wasn't as fluid. But he basically said like, this is going to put less like tension on my elbows. It's going to allow me to play a bit better without being as athletic and whatever else the reason was. This is obvious. I'm a pretty big rookie. So this is probably a tennis expert. It's just like, this is like literally me just saying what I heard a commentator say. So just keep that in mind. Keep in mind, idiot talking right now. Doesn't know much about tennis. What a very casual fan who enjoys watching it but doesn't actually know much about it. But yeah, I was like, oh yeah, that's like when I learned the core. That's like whenever a pro invests in relearning an entire mechanical setup. Gumiho did that in like 2016 or 2017. I don't know what setup he changed exactly. I just remember him talking about how he just couldn't keep up with the other pros, and he realized like he had to like change the way he was doing things. You know, there was a lot of times in the early days to inject, people would like put their hatcheries on different hotkeys and they double tap 4-4 V click 5-5 V click. Like there's all these really awkward, unnecessary extra button presses. The core, on the other hand, you're using the right side of the keyboard. You slant it slightly. You have like 50 keys right underneath resting. And the biggest movement I'm doing is F7, which is my F2, my select all army, and it's just like my middle finger just kind of goes just up a little bit, or down to my full stop. It's like, that's it. You're never bouncing your hand across the keyboard. So the core is really nice, but it took me a big investment of time to learn. I was way worse for a few weeks. After a month, I felt I could ladder. Even 2-3 months later, I'd sometimes get in a really intense situation where the adrenaline was pumping in a tournament where I was like really surprised by my opponent's build. And when your adrenaline kicks in and all that sort of stuff, guess what? You revert to your deepest layer of muscle memory. And I realized I'm like reaching for old buttons that don't apply anymore. And I was like, oh, that's really bad in a tournament. That's not good. But that was part of the process, is like I needed to go, okay, cool, that happened. Now I can like simulate that situation in a replay in my brain and just grind the new neural pathway until that's a deeper rivet, until that's what I always automatically go to. Most people aren't going to be willing to put in that time. Most pro players whose money is their income is very, you know, unstable, they're not going to, it's hard to make that effort. Probe did it, Showtime did it, sort of did it to a certain extent. A few other pros did, not too many in total, because it's just kind of like going through that process is painful. And it's also they're unsure about it, because they're like, well, it's not fully tested. There's too many unknowns. It's very complex to understand the setup and all the little details. Things like the way it's optimized so you don't have the same finger pressing 2 buttons in a row. It's always different fingers, because that's always faster than moving one finger between 2 buttons. It's little things like adding alternates on keys, so that, for instance, playing Zerg, the same button for select lava is the same button that builds the roach and the Zergling and the drone. So you can tap the same button just twice, or hold down the same button, both selects the lava and builds the units. All the pros use better registry settings on their keyboard now to adjust their repeat rates and that sort of stuff to help with it. But a lot of them still aren't using some of those techniques. So they're still having to press extra buttons here and there and that sort of stuff. And for them, it's just, it's opportunity cost and it's fear, because it's not spread as much. I feel the mechanics in StarCraft would be much more organized, and then be more of a consensus on what's the right way to do it if there was more money in the game. But as it is, because it's not got a crazy bunch of new players coming up and into it and breaking to the top ranks, because there's not enough money to support that, you don't have the old players being forced to relearn things. Instead, they're kind of happy to rest on their laurels a little bit.
Interesting. Do you think you'll develop a version of the core for Stormgate?
So I didn't actually develop it. It was Jack Attack and stuff. Right, yeah. So the guys, they're all working on, I'm having a mental blank.
Sunspear.
Gates of Pyre, Immortal.
Yeah.
Immortal Gates of Pyre. And they've created basically the core, or like a different version of it, just like a very, very optimized hotkey setup that is like a little unnatural when you first use it, but you pick it up so quick. It's actually like really well designed. You're just like, I'm like, wait, you're holding down like this button for this? But then you immediately like, we're like, oh, I can see why this is so good. So those guys are very big geniuses. The problem with the core as well is customizability in games. So there's a lot of problems with the core. Customizability in games. So first of all, there's that crazy amount of learning, which is why I only recommend it to advanced learners, musicians, programmers, these sort of people. Other people, I say, if you're really hardcore and you really want to, go for it. But most people aren't really hardcore. They go, oh, that sounds like it'll make the game easier, which is like the exact opposite mindset. Whenever you learn something hard, you can't be doing it to make something easier. It will technically in the long run, but only once you go through much harder initial slog. So the problem is other games don't have as much customizability. Certain things might not work within those game clients. That's why I play standard hotkeys on pretty much every other game, and I just try to move a few things into reach of my hand. So I don't know if I'll be using the core for future games because of that. I think it's something where I'm like, if you want to learn it, that's great, and if you love StarCraft, sure. But like Age of Empires has pretty limited customization. I know they've improved it a little bit, and a few other games I've been playing, but I just don't know if it works for everything. So it's very finicky to set up. And if you're someone who's like, okay, I've learned this will be the way I play all games from now on, it won't necessarily apply. So if that throws you off, the core is not for you.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So one thing I heard you talk about a lot was Warcraft 2 being like an important part of your, so sort of initial entry into gaming, and it seemed like you had a lot of passion for that game at the time. Um, what elements of that game would you like to see in Stormgate?
So Warcraft 3 is when I mean Warcraft 2 is definitely like a big RTS just enjoying campaigns and stuff experience, and I've even replayed it in the last couple of years because I love that game. But Warcraft 3 is where I really got into ladder and stuff like that. And Warcraft 3 is great because it is a bit slower paced and it does have these very interesting slow battles, right? Warcraft 3 has some of the slowest battles. I mean, you watch a grunt and a footman face off, it's straight up boring, let's be real. But you add heroes, you add abilities, you add a lot of things like surrounding key units and blocking the way the pathing works. There's lots of like blocking each other and stuff. I still am sad because I haven't taken the time to learn Dota 2 and its engine. And Dota 1, I like could pick up and just be like, oh, it's so satisfying because I know the way the units move so well and the way the blocking works and that sort of stuff. There's like a real push and pull to the micro in battles. Very kind of just drawn out methodical engagements that are very interesting in that regard. The downside is the macro is pretty boring in Warcraft in general. Like it's very, very basic. So I definitely don't want it to go that far, but when you compare it to the blitzing fast engagements of StarCraft 2, there is definitely a middle ground, and I'm pretty sure pretty much every RTS dev over the last few years has said, "Oh, we're aiming for somewhere in the middle. We're not going to go StarCraft 2 brutality. We're not going to go Warcraft 3 super slow battles either."
What do you think the biggest potential pitfalls for the Frost Giant team will be with their development of Stormgate?
Hmm, that's a good question. Scope and optics, I think. So in terms of optics, and scope, they're tied in together. So scope, they have a large scope, a wide scope of them, and they want to do lots of things. 3v3, 1v1, having heroes in one mode and not in the other. Potentially, I believe they've said that there's all these things that they've been talked about and obviously aren't set in stone. I'm sure over the next months, I think later this year, they're meant to be coming out with the beta. So I'm sure over the next months, we're going to be having like more concrete news on what the game's looking like. But I think there's a lot of like, they have a large scope and I think they're iterating very quickly, and their whole system is clearly built upon the ability to iterate and build things faster and better. And they've talked about how they've got this good technology base to do that, so they're just not wasting time. They're like, hey, once we're set up with everything, we're gonna have the tools to just like build everything we need at a crazy rapid rate. Sorry. I think the problem is like if things are a little unfinished and people are like, you were meant to be the holy child, and people sometimes like hype almost bites you in the butt a bit because everyone's like StarCraft's natural, progressor. It's gonna be so good, blah blah blah, and it's like it will, and I'm pretty sure it will be great. I just think it might like take time after release, like well after beta and release and everything, because like no game comes out perfect. StarCraft 2 was a bit of a steamer in some regards when it came out. The engine was great, the units felt great, and as a result, you could still have great games. The maps were terrible, balance wasn't fantastic. There was a lot of issues. The observing was terrible. You didn't even have like production tab or anything in replays. There was no overlays. The whole bottom of the screen was blocked. There's just like missing social functions, all this sort of stuff. But it became a great game, and I think that's just something that I accept these days. But a lot of RTS gamers are still angry about, right? And they're older and they're very critical. If something isn't like living up to their expectations, the moment it hits their eyeballs and their view, they're kind of turned off. So I think because they're trying to work on so many things at once, it's going to be hard to come out with a perfectly polished anything when things are kind of meeting the light of day. But I think they seem to have a good idea of communication-wise what they're going to do. So as long as they kind of learn, because a lot of them were involved with Blizzard in that golden period I was talking about of like community management and everything. If they apply the kind of PR and public-facing lessons from then of just really openly like explaining things, being like, we hear you about this. This is a concern. This is why we're doing this. We're still working on this. This is coming. As long as they keep that communication going and they just keep fixing the issues, there's always a lot of room to push through. But they're going to have to like wade through a slug, big swamp of negativity, because that's just what happens at game releases. People have been let down so many times. So they're going to have to like work through and address things systematically that the community gets angry about. I think they'll get through it. I'm just hoping that it doesn't like dampen a launch, for instance, right? I've seen too many games that launch in terrible half-finished states. And it's why Elden Ring looked so good, is it was actually 90% complete when it came out. Holy crud, which is just insane. You know, you get to the later areas, you're like, oh, this game isn't finished. But most people didn't make it to the end areas because it's such a vast game. So it doesn't matter. They think it was a finished game. It wasn't. It was not a finished game. It was maybe 80% complete even. I don't know. But it was still a fantastic game and so much better quality than everything else. So I guess that's the one thing that works is the standards are, everyone's angry, but the standards are also lower because most AAA games are steaming hunks of garbage over the last few years. So as a result, I think Stormgate, you know, even though they're dealing with the hardcore RTS, I think they can definitely create something really good, but only time will tell.
What are your expectations for what the esports scene could look like around Stormgate?
I think it'll be a bit more run by esports companies rather than, like, I don't think they're going to be like, "God, we're the developer, we own this." Like, I just don't think they have any interest in that. Would be my because it's a huge investment and it's a risk. If you're just like, we're hosting a $20 million circuit, you know, we're doing all this stuff, and I mean the amount of overhyped crap that is being done by major gaming companies. Listen,
Oh, only
Overwatch League, guys, it's gonna be the big thing. Like
yeah.
it's such a scam. Like it's disgusting to me when people in my space in esports and gaming, over those couple of years around Overwatch League launching, basically you saw everyone come in who are now, they're the same people who are in crypto, esports. Buy esports now. It's going to the moon. It's going to be big. Oh, you know, NFTs are the new thing now. It's a Overwatch League NFT. It was such obvious scamming. You know,
Yeah.
people just talking things up and saying you got to get in now. You got to get in now. You got to get in early, right? And it was all like just marketing and BS. I've always talked about the organic nature of esports. You know, the number of people out there who talk about Starcraft being a dead game, and they're like, "Oh, there's 100,000 people watching the World Championship. Our game they put millions of dollars in. Every game doesn't have that. Every day doesn't have that. But oh, what? But I thought Starcraft was a dead game. You know, and it's like because so many people are, I guess, not educated on this, and they kind of they buy into the hype of a lot of these things. I always say the best esports, the ones with the most longevity, the most badass esports are the ones that actually would have a scene if there was no involvement from the publisher whatsoever and they were hands off. Look at Smash Brothers. They actively have a publisher trying to burn down their events and like light their scene on fire, and they still will not stop because it's just a badass community. Counter-Strike has had natural, it started as a mod, that mod became huge. And it's had many iterations since then, but it is huge because of that. Dota as well. It was a mod that grew on its own and people loved and hosted tournaments. Same with StarCraft. So I think the guys in the esports department over there at Stormgate realize this and are like, cool, let's just let that happen. And we can support it a bit and run some of our own tournaments, but let's just like give the tools to our community. And they have talked about how like, hey, we're going to have good stuff for use map settings, good map editors and things so people can make their own content. I think they're realizing that if they just create a platform, the community will naturally do the rest. They will host a massive esports scene. They will host a crazy amount of content. Content creators will be popping up as all this new content's being created. You get this like cycle, this virtuous cycle. Content creator has new videos about mods to make, like a Giant Grant games. There's going to be a lot more people like that if Stormgate picks up. Like Giant Grant games, just constant new mods being made, new maps, tournaments popping up, hosting the competitive mode. You've got more casual tournaments and just casual people playing the social modes. That doesn't rely on you hosting a $20 million circuit and trying to, you know, basically steal people's investment money. So, yeah.
Very sober take. I like that. The last...
I haven't thought about Overwatch League in a while and just how silly that was. So it just got me riled up a bit.
Yeah, the way that was pitched was like, this is going to be the new NFL. Like, that was...
With a game that hasn't come out yet.
Yeah.
Like, they were like, the game hasn't come out. We don't even know if people will like it. But, like, it's going to be the next NFL. You're like, what? Do you guys not understand? Like, just imagine if someone was like, Ultimate Frisbee.
Yeah.
It's this new sport. Like, no one's played this before Ultimate Frisbee came out. Like, Ultimate Frisbee, it's going to get in now.
We're building stadiums.
We're building stadiums. You're like, what? Shouldn't you have local clubs and people enjoying it first? Like, it's just, it's absolute nonsense, man. It's, yeah.
Yeah, I see it with it's like every game. Yeah, it's like every game that comes out has like $1 million tournament, and it's funny like even at like what you're talking about with the organic element of it with like DreamHack Atlanta, right? Like last November, where you had all these other stages for there was one for like Fortnite or something, and like these kind of obviously not like big like championship level events, but events nonetheless, where there was like 50 people there, and then the Starcraft stage was just like booming, exploding, which obviously nobody really expected, but kind of ended up working out that way because there is organic excitement, and there is like a dedicated group of people that don't care how much money is up for grabs. They just want to go watch the best StarCraft players play.
Exactly. Yeah. There's just a natural excitement around it. I mean, this is why Brood War is such a great game as well. I still, as someone who is such a casual appreciator of Brood War, I'm so bad at it. Like literally, when I play it, I just like make lings and hydras. And I'm like, wait, oh, this is the unit hydras are bad against. I guess I lose. I'm just like dropping zerglings and doing dumb stuff. But it's like when I watch that game, you don't need to be an expert at the game. You're just like, oh, like it's the push and pull and the positioning and the ramps and the choke points and the cliffs and the high grounds, like it's amazing, and you can see the wrestling match physically of what the players are doing. It's just, oh, this translates, this is something that is great to watch, and people are naturally excited over it. So yeah, I just think definitely people should let the organic excitement be there, and then you can build upon that, but you can't put the chicken before the egg.
Most definitely. So the last couple of things I wanted to touch upon were just little tidbits I thought were interesting from the your daily 100, right? So one thing you talked about that I think is kind of neat is like the idea of getting over your ego from youth. And that seems like it was kind of an important thing to you. How do you feel you did that, right? I feel like sometimes when people have a big ego, they never get over it. So how do you feel like you achieve that?
Well, you never get over it. You just learn how to channel it into different directions. I'm still very egotistical, and I think it's a useful thing. I think a lot of people, when they get into competitive activities that rely on you staying calm under pressure, especially something like StarCraft, that's very like stressing when you're playing at the limit of your abilities. Doesn't have to be. It's not always. When you're really well practiced in a situation, you should be actually kind of flow statey and zen. But whenever you're having to adapt to new things, is when it gets quite stressful. Um, yeah, it's something where it's easy to say, well, I panicked and therefore like I should not panic, and look at the Korean players and think like just having no outward emotion. Oh, so I should just quash my emotion or something. It's like those guys still feel emotion. They just don't express it outwardly, and there's a cultural difference there and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, let yourself feel the emotion, I think is very important. It's not a bad thing. You just need to pay attention to it. You need to process it, which is kind of like this is the older you get, the more you see it in every problem you run into. It's like everything you do where you self-sabotage or don't operate as well as you could, it's because you're unable to like have that difficult conversation with yourself. So ego is kind of like that a lot, where it's like, okay, like I feel really good when I do well at this thing and I feel really bad at it. And like you gotta be like, okay, like hold on, wait a second, like where am I getting my like self-worth from, or my identity? It's like every time I win the video game, I'm a god. And every time I lose, I'm a worthless piece of crap, man. I'm a worthless piece of crap. And it's like it's obviously not a healthy place to be. It's very extreme, and it doesn't reflect reality, right? With any sort of like figuring out my own thoughts and like stuff, it's like it's always like trying to basically get more in touch with reality, because my emotions and my ego will blow things out of proportion massively. So being able to like kind of take a breath and go, okay, like let's actually think about like this in detail. Think about the thing I don't want to think about that's like painful or frustrating. It's like, okay, you lost the game. All right, that thing, you hated it. The guy's an idiot. He's a piece of shit. He's a worse player than you. I can't believe I lost. And you're like, okay, like let's unpack that a little bit. Like, why do I feel he's worse than me? Because his build was low skill, or whatever crazy thing your ego throws out. If you actually have that conversation with yourself, you realize you're talking to a crazy person. Like the emotional words that pop into your head that are often very ego fueled, they don't really hold up any substance when you actually pay attention to them. You're like, oh, okay, this is like the ramblings of a madman. It becomes like a little bit easier to go like, that's not reality. I don't need to listen to that like that thought that pops into my head. My thoughts are not me. And definitely in the earlier days, it was more just like, I want to improve hard enough that I'm just gonna bloody use it to improve, and that's it. And I'll just take the anger, use it to get better. Take the anger, use it to get better. It was just kind of like a vicious fueling into the thing. But definitely, if there's something that keeps popping up these days, I'm a little bit better at kind of like taking a few deep breaths and having a little conversation with myself, or writing a little journal entry. Or I haven't really used meditation much in a while. I'll just do like a little breathing every now and then. But a little bit of mindfulness was very good when I was first trying to figure this out, because it helps you bring those thoughts into your consciousness. Because otherwise, it can be on an almost subconscious level. Those words popping to your head, and it's just like this raw emotion and feeling. So you can't really process it until you like take a moment to like isolate your thoughts a little bit. Do some breathing, close your eyes, and just listen to your thoughts. Like, you try to focus on a certain sensation, and certain thoughts just keep distracting you and keep distracting you, and then it's learning to focus on those. Right? It's your classic mindfulness exercise where then you start to be like, oh, okay, I can be more aware of those, because normally I don't even realize those thoughts, and those distractions are constantly interrupting my process. The monkey mind is just chattering the whole time. But once you learn to recognize that a little bit better, you're able to realize your own bullshit a little bit quicker. Not always instantly or anything close to it. Don't get me wrong. This is all like ideal scenario. It's like it's the tools that I wish I used more. But yeah, that basically I think sums up most of the tool package of kind of keeping my head screwed on straight, and being able to kind of improve and get better at things without being so afraid of failure or so upset over things not going my way.
Yeah, it's funny because it makes me think about, like, I was complaining to my therapist about road rage, right? Like, I live in New York City, and I drive into Brooklyn every day, and oh my god, I get way too angry. And she told me that, right? Like, try the breathing exercises, and it's not even that the breathing exercises calm me. It's just that as soon as I start doing them, I end up laughing at myself, because I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
you're so angry that you're doing breathing exercises right now. This is insane.
You just need that tiny moment of distance, right, from the situation to realize how absurd you're being, and you're like, oh, I'm being a crazy person right now. Like, just take a breath, man. Like, what the hell?
My go-to thing, like, a lot of times I end up saying to my girlfriend, like, in those road rage scenarios, like, I wish I had laser beams and I would blow up that guy right now.
You're like, yeah, I can just pick that car up right now and
Yeah.
just throw it off the road, man. Like,
I wish. Uh, but so the very last thing, also just kind of a random tidbit thing. You mentioned reading a lot of fantasy novels. Any particular standout books or series over the years that really kind of meant a lot to you?
so many good ones, man. I guess I'll just go more by recency. At the moment, I'm on the second book of the Three Body Problem, which is a fantastic epic sci-fi series by a Chinese author. I believe the Game of Thrones guys are actually they're working on trying to get a show going for that. So let's hope they channel the beginning of Game of Thrones and not the end of Game of Thrones, since they've already lost everyone's love and appreciation after their. I mean, the thing is, I think this series is finished, whereas Game of Thrones didn't really seriously drop until they didn't have as much source material. So hopefully they'll do well with it. Yeah.
I'm a big
And then,
Song of
like,
Ice and Fire fan, so yeah, just waiting forever for that.
Yeah, please, man. It's all right. Brandon Sanderson's waiting. He already finished off Wheel of Time, and if things go south, he's probably going to be finishing that series as well. Magic System, I really love the. Oh man, I'm so bad at remembering book names. The one with the metal, the Allomancy, the Brandon Sanderson. Not Stormlight Archives, the other one. Let me. The Allomancy books, what were they? Mistborn, the Mistborn series. Just has the coolest magic system. That was so sick. I love it when they have a good magic system. Name of the Wind's fantastic. I've been recommended like Alizar or something, Book of the something, that apparently is this like crazy deep hardcore one that I've got the audiobooks of, and I'm after Three Body Problem, I'm gonna see if I can get through. But apparently it's like one of those series where it's like really slow, and you like have to gruel through it, but then it gets like so amazing and is so worth it if you put in the time to like get into it. So that's kind of soon on the list. I can't even remember the exact name, but yeah, those are all big ones. Obviously, growing up, like Lord of the Rings and stuff like that was great. Wheel of Time, really enjoyed when I was younger. It's kind of funny to reread some parts of it these days, because it is kind of hilarious how scattered that story got. But yeah, those are some of my favorites. I definitely love Name of the Wind as well, but that's another series that will never be finished. Like, he's just having too much fun going around doing stuff, and I always say the best books in fantasy series are the first ones, and then as soon as they get successful, they always put too much expectation on their shoulders, and they just overthink it and they obsess over it, and it's like it doesn't need to be a perfect wrap up to a series, because Return of the King was okay. It did have actually Return of the King had a fantastic finish when they get back to the Shire, but it's just one of those things where it's like I don't know, man. I've seen it happen so many times now with authors, with Robert Jordan, with George R. R. Martin, with can't remember the name of the Wind guy's name as well, but it feels like they build it up a bit too much in their head.
Yeah, no, I'm a bit of a novice to the like fantasy reading realm. Like, for me, it's basically just Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and now Song of Ice and Fire. But yeah, no, I got really into the audiobooks for Song of Ice and Fire, which like, and like, but like I keep listening to them because like I really like the narration, and so like I'm stuck in this cycle of like every time I go to throw on an audiobook, it's just one of those, and I have like over 1,000 hours listening to that series now. It's so ridiculous.
That's awesome. I love audiobooks as well, man. It's been a game changer. Like the ability to exercise or walk around or listen to it when I'm on a train or traveling, like plane rides are so much better.
Yeah.
The fact that I can have podcasts and audiobooks and stuff, it's like, oh my god, I didn't realize audio would be such a game changer, but it really, I feel like has just upped my day-to-day enjoyment so much.
Especially on planes, I feel like it's kind of nice to it's easy to fall asleep to too, right? Like you're focusing on the
Yes.
content and you just fall asleep to it. It's really convenient. But anyway, okay, we're getting way off topic here. I am out of
Sorry, man.
questions. No, that's it. No, we're done. No
No
apologies
worries.
necessary. So thanks so much for taking the time, man. I really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, of course. Any closing words?
Just thanks for doing what you're doing. I mean, it's really cool. I'd heard from other people, a few of the other casters and stuff, that they're kind of like, who's this StarCraft historian guy? And then like, oh yeah, he has really good chats and he likes StarCraft a lot, and all of his videos are actually really nice and cool. So I'd heard quite a few good things. So yeah, you must be doing something right that everyone seems to be enjoying your content right now, man.
Thank you so much. That's very nice to hear. Sweet. Anyway, bye bye.
Thanks so much, mate. Bye bye.